it's like everything I said was wrong. So it's ridiculous. Yeah, that's reference to the revolution. She apologized for it. Omar said that she didn't know the word portrayed an anti-Semitic trope at the time, and called her usage of the word offensive and unfortunate and offensive. So, yeah, that is pretty much what she was trying to say, saying Israel has hypnotized our world. That's what the thing is, to carry out evil. And that was, again, something that she apologized for. Yeah, and she give her credit for actually coming out to do that. But again, I think the larger idea of what she's trying to say is something that she will defend, and a lot of people on the left wing will defend here to the end. I think it's very important and very critical, really critical, to call these people out on their lies of saying, okay, like that these like that Omar and Tlaib and others support anti-Semitism and support just hatred of Jews when they've clearly come out time and time again and announced it. And there's a strong difference between that one way or the other. All right, we are a little bit short for time, but we're going to speed through one really quick story. As a media bloodbath at Vice has continued, as Vice's media CEO Nancy Dubuque has planned to tighten spending and achieve profitability, which will include laying off 10% of the organization's staff. Ooh, that is rough. That means roughly a loss of 250 jobs from the company's 2,500 member staff. An internal email that opened with several laudatory paragraphs of Vice's recent accomplishments. Dubuque then announced the layoffs. So that is very, very tough stuff for the great people really at Vice. Yeah, so it's, yeah, all the people who have been laid off. Obviously, we hope that we see, it's really tough. I really could get more into this issue of digital media and journalism and that stuff. But it's, yeah, we were really kind of cramped for time, and that's something I think worth doing somewhat of a special about, because what giant corporations are doing to journalism on a broad scale is very, very disturbing. We now move on to a great story in The Intercept by the John Schwartz, the man, about Elliot Abrams. It begins on December 11th, 1981, in El Salvador. A Salvadoran military unit created and trained by the U.S. Army began slaughtering everyone they could find in a remote village called El Mozote. Before murdering the women and girls, the soldiers raped them repeatedly, including as young as 10 years old, and joked that their favorites were 12-year-olds. One witness describes a soldier tossing a 3-year-old child into the air and doing some pretty... just so you know, I apologize. I should have warned for anyone who's listening with maybe like kids in the car or something like that. Very, again, graphic stuff here. So one witness actually described the soldier tossing a 3-year-old child into the air and impaling him with his bayonet. Jesus. The final death toll was over 800 people. The next day was December 12th and was the first day on the job for Elliot Abrams as an Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs in the Reagan administration. Abrams snapped into action, helping to lead a cover-up of the massacre. News reports of what happened, Abrams told the Senate, were not credible, and the whole thing was being significantly misused as propaganda by anti-government guerrillas in the country. This past Friday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo named Abrams America's special envoy for Venezuela. According to Pompeo, Abrams will have responsibility for all things related to our efforts to restore democracy in the oil-rich nation. The choice of Abrams sends a clear message to Venezuela and the world. The Trump administration intends to brutalize Venezuela while producing a stream of unctuous rhetoric, just real frankly obnoxious rhetoric about America's love for democracy and human rights. Combining these factors, though, the brutality and the unctuousness is Abrams' core competency. Abrams previously served as multitude positions in Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush administrations, often with titles declaring their focus on morality. He was the State Department's human rights position, leader of the State Department's Human Rights Division, Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, Senior Director for Democracy, Human Rights, and International Operations for the National Security Council under Bush, and George Bush's Deputy National Security Advisor for Global Democracy Strategy in 2005-2009. In these positions, Abrams participated in some of the most ghastly acts of U.S. foreign policy over the past 40 years, from acts in South America to supporting the Iraq War. He is truly one of the leaders, probably if not the most successful military interventionist and war hawk this country has ever seen. Yeah. Jesus. It's pretty incredible. Abrams, he's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, joined the Reagan administration in 1981 at age 33. He received a promotion due to a stroke of luck. Reagan wanted to name Ernest Lefevre an assistant secretary of state for human rights and humanitarian affairs, but Lefevre's nomination was ran aground when two of his brothers revealed that he believed African Americans were inferior, quote, both intellectually speaking, inferior intellectually speaking, and disappointed Reagan was forced to turn to Abrams again as his second choice. The key Reagan administration concern at the time was Central America, in particular Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. They all have been dominated by tiny, cruel white elites since their founding, with a century's worth of help from U.S. interventions. In each country, the ruling families saw their society's other inhabitants as human-shaped animals who could be harnessed or killed as needed. So yeah, pretty much they were being ruled by just awful people who didn't have the best interests in mind at all of them, and they were pretty much installed, again, by the United States. But shortly after Reagan took office, Anastasio Somoza, the dictator of Nicaragua, had been overthrown by a socialist revolution. The Reaganites rashly saw this as a threat to the government of Nicaragua's neighbors. Each country had large populations who, similarly, did not enjoy being worked to death on coffee plantations or watching their children die of easily treated diseases. And then, again, one of the biggest things that leads to socialism is treatment like that. People were ready to take up pitchforks, and there's a whole mix of stuff from Abrams and his time in El Salvador. The extermination of El Mozote was just a drop in the river of what happened river of blood, what happened in El Salvador during the 1980s. About 75,000 Salvadorans died during what's called the Civil War, although pretty much all the killing was done by the government, and it's pretty much associated death squads. The numbers alone don't even tell the whole story. El Salvador is a small country, about the size of New Jersey. The equivalent amount of deaths in the U.S. would be 5 million people. So 5 million people dead because of someone else in your country coming in and assassinating these people. Insane. Criticism of the U.S. policy at the time was not confined to the left. During this period, Charles Makeling, who led the State Department planning for counterinsurgencies during the 1960s, wrote in the Los Angeles Times that he was supporting mafia-like oligarchies in El Salvador and elsewhere, was directly complicit in methods of Heinrich Himmler's extermination squads. So, yeah, comparing him to Nazis, some of their actions, which is insane. So, yeah, this is the guy who, again, was recently picked to lead the efforts in Venezuela. This is the guy who led all that at that time. The situation in Guatemala during the 1980s was much the same, and as were Abrams' actions. After the U.S. engineered the overthrow of Guatemala's democratically elected president in 1954, and the country descended into a nightmare of revolving military dictatorships between 1960 and 1996, another civil war, where, quote, in quotes, 2,000 Guatemalans were killed, and that was brought to you by Dan Abrams. So the U.S. had to support the Guatemalan government, Abrams argued, because if we take the attitude, don't come to us until you're perfect, we're going to walk away from this problem until Guatemala has a perfect human rights record, then we're going to be leaving in the lurch people who are trying to make progress. One example of the people who were really making an honest effort, according to Abrams, was Rios Montt. Rios Montt was found guilty in 2013 of committing genocide against the country's indigenous Mayans. So he was making a real effort, according to Dan Abrams, to bring some good progress. On the other hand, in Nicaragua, Abrams would become best known for his involvement in the Reagan administration's push to overthrow Nicaragua's revolutionary Sandinista government. He had advocated for a full invasion of Nicaragua in 1983, immediately after the successful U.S. attack on the teeny island nation of Grenada, when Congress cut off funds to the Contras, an anti-Sandinista guerrilla force created by the U.S. Abrams successfully persuaded the Sultan of Brunei to cough up $10 million for the cause. Unfortunately, Abrams, acting under the codename Kenilworth, provided the Sultan with the wrong Swiss bank account number, so the money was wired instead to a random person. So $10 million random for just going up to the random. So not only is he awful, but he's also incompetent, apparently. And pretty much, he's been through pretty much all the worst Republican administrations of the past, like, however many years, like 50, 30, 40 years. To Ilhan, a lot of surprise of Washington's more naive insiders at Chris Hayes. Abrams was back soon after George W. Bush entered the White House. When you need to do an intervention, call Elliot Abrams. And guess what? Guess what's going to happen? Guess what the Trump did? So pretty much you get the idea that this is again what all they did in Israel. I'm going to give you the stuff of what he did in Venezuela. By the beginning of 2002, Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez had become deeply irritating to the Bush White House, which was filled with veterans of battle of the 1980s. So they pretty much took all the Reagan people who did all the interventions in South America, brought them back, and pretty much did a bunch more awful things under the Bush administration. And again, here's the thing. There are so many other instances of bad things that these people have done over the years, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Central America. And there's just, like, the key thing I want to impress on you here today, if it's one thing at all, is that this is not all that has really gone on. And I think it's very important to realize that. And if you want to find out more about this, I encourage you to go research it on The Intercept. John Schultz of the great of The Intercept has pretty much compiled all of this, and we don't have as much time as I would like really to go through this in a thorough and complete manner. But the fact is that Dan Abrams back here in the White House, now picked by Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo to help deal with restoring democracy to Venezuela. Very disturbing stuff. Yeah. Crazy stuff. There's so much more here. So no matter what gruesome particulars of Abrams' career you want to choose, the important thing to remember is that as the U.S. Eagle tightens its razor-sharp talons around yet another Latin American country, is that Abrams isn't that exceptional. He's a cog in the machine. It's the machine that's the problem, not its malevolent parts. And the idea of kind of U.S. interventionism so prevalent throughout our time. We've seen it happen time and time again. This guy has been there at almost every major point. And the fact that he's coming back to Venezuela after all the things to help the Trump administration deal with Venezuela should make anyone who's against the idea of an intervention or an invasion even deeply, deeply worried. Elliot Abrams leading the charge of restoring democracy to Venezuela is something that should chill everyone who wants to see no more war to the bone. All right. Finally, we lighten the mood up with, by the way, great article there from John Schwartz, but another great article from Mehdi Hassan that starts very appealingly. Is this a joke? Billionaire Howard Schultz is considering running for president of the United States. The ex-Starbucks CEO and former owner of the Seattle Supersonics, who has zero experience in government or politics, thinks Donald Trump is not qualified to be commander-in-chief. Pot calling the kettle back there for sure. If Trump is not qualified, what the hell is Schultz? In all fairness to the pretend president, Trump is able to command crowds and attention like no other politician on the right. His name recognition was off the charts when he ran in the Republican primaries in 2016. The Starbucks boss, on the other hand, literally has, what is he going for him? He has nice connections to billionaires because he is one. He's pretty much a charisma-free zone. The only crowds he seems to attract are hecklers. And the truth is, though, despite claiming to be bored by Trump, voicing his opposition to the president's vitriolic displays of bigotry and hate and divisiveness, Schultz has far more in common with the reality star turned POTUS than he likes to admit. That's the thing. His Trumpian ego has made him think that an old random white guy who got rich selling coffee thinks he can now be the leader of the free world. Again, just ridiculous. Trying to buy his way to the presidency is what we see here. And getting a lot of media coverage for doing it. Attacking the ideas of the 70% tax rate as suggested by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And he said the majority of Americans are opposed to it. But that's a complete lie. As 59% voters support this tax proposal, according to a Hill Harris X survey. But again, I always talk with the billionaires in the end. Who cares about polls?